Welcome to RHE Podcast. Today we have back by popular demand Darrington, who has a whole bunch of questions for us, or so I think, but we've got questions for him too. So it's going to be a really compelling episode. We are here. It's early in the morning, our time when we're taping this, and we've all got our coffee going. I hope you've got yours because you're going to need it. Isaiah?
It's actually 1 a.m. here. 1 a.m. Yeah, thank you for joining us today, Darrington. Thank you so much for having us back, for coming back again.
Yeah, absolutely a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so Darrington, I just really got to clear the air on something that I really don't like you very much, man. I could have probably gotten over the hair, okay, maybe, but you really represented yourself totally different last time. I mean, we didn't put it on camera, but you're like, oh, I'm all shy, and then you came on like double barrels loaded, man. That was freaking awesome. You totally showed us up. So I was so impressed by you. You stole the show from us. So great job. And we look forward to having you again. Yeah.
Yeah. I hope, I try to be humble, and, but sometimes that comes off as being a little bit of a snipe.
I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I mean, I was immediately afterwards, I was like, man, you think I could possibly change you out for Marshall? Yeah, we had a great time. So actually, it's funny. I thought it was so funny that you described the problem of evil as a plot hole. I mean, I was laughing, and it was clever. It was clever. That was a zinger. Like, that was one of those, you owned God temporarily. But we wanted to start off breaking some ice, talking about maybe some plot holes in movies. So I got a really big one that you guys, have you guys seen Dumb and Dumber?
Yeah.
Right? Okay. Yeah. We spent a whole summer, I swear, every day watching that movie with my family. But
oh, you don't mean the show? I thought you meant this podcast. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So in the movie Dumb and Dumber, the guy, they call him the gas man, the hitman. He believes that the guys are like professionals, right? And he thinks that they're following him. But later on, he pulls over on the side of the road, and he's like, oh, I'm just gonna pretend like I have a broke down car. So that made absolutely no sense in the storyline.
I could not help but to pick on your favorite movie of all time, The Karate Kid, because it turns out when you Google movie plot holes, the very first thing that comes up most of the time is the situation where in the movie the referee explains to the fighters that a kick to the head is a disqualifying attack, and then of course Daniel wins the fight, right? Wins the tournament with the crane kick, which straight to the head.
Now, if you watch the season Cobra Kai, they actually go on quiet. It actually probably every season gets mentioned because the guys cannot get over that. It happened like 30 years ago, and they're still harping on it. Marshall, you got one?
Yeah, this is actually really basic, and I think everybody is familiar with this particular plot hole. But in the movie Titanic, there was enough room for both of them on that door. I mean, they've even gone out and measured it. They've analyzed this scientifically. Maybe Rose just didn't really want to hook up with the peasant.
No, maybe at the end we find out. Well, that's kind of it's Leonardo DiCaprio, so that's probably not it. But she probably wanted to keep the golden or metal, whatever she had. I forgot.
the little heart necklace, whatever. Yeah, the jewel. Yeah.
So I wanted to stick with some classics here, and I think that the Citizen Kane one is a really good example because the whole movie is completely made moot by the fact that at the very beginning of the movie he says Rosebud, which kicks off the investigation, but there's nobody there to witness that.
But you actually don't know that from the story, though. You don't know that someone's not off to the side, or he has a caregiver there because he is getting ready to die. So
right. It's played off as he's dying alone. I guess from a storytelling perspective, it would have been nice to have that that aspect there, since it is the single thing in which every other strand in the story is tied to, right? Because like
Right.
old man dies alone, says word. Okay, if a tree falls in the forest and there's nobody there, right? Does that spin off an investigation?
Yeah, what's the deal with Armageddon, right? You know, Armageddon, asteroids
Mhm.
crash into the Earth, we're all going to die, and they have to drill a hole in the asteroid and put a nuke in it to blow it up, all right? So why are they getting a bunch of oil dudes when they could just take astronauts and train them to drill instead of taking oil dudes and train them to be astronauts?
That was pretty out there. I
You
did
know,
like the demands. The whole scenes where they're giving them all the demands.
yeah.
That was a pretty funny scene. And that being said, I want to symbolically take off of these gloves because the gloves are coming off Darrington. So you might have been wondering why I'm wearing these gloves. And so Darrington, I got to pay you back for last time. And that was,
Okay.
you disrespected me in my own house, Darrington.
Hit me.
All right, they're gone. Well, you're hitting me. You're hitting me.
So I thought I was being overly polite. Like I went way, way out of my way to make sure that I was not expressly attacking. And
I thought it was hilarious.
okay.
That was hilarious. I'm joking. I'm joking with you. You wouldn't be on again if I thought you were being disrespectful. Trust me. I mean, I did think some of this stuff was pretentious a little bit, but we can get into that.
It translates as being pretentious. It's hard not to.
But what else would I expect from someone with the name Darrington? I mean, you sound like a lord in like the UK or something, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
yeah.
Anyway, you want to start this off?
So you know, we were talking about the plot holes and the problem of evil.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think the problem of evil, I don't think I need to go through and define it. I think we all kind of understand it at this point. Because for many of us unbelievers and people who have left the faith, it's the first question, and ultimately it's the last question, right? So when we're very young, we ask the powers that be, why is it that bad things happen if the, all-powerful creator of the universe is a good guy? And we're given a lot of reasons, rationality, excuses, but the more you read about it, I think it can be broken down into two different steps. So the question is the character in the literature, the character of God, a good person, someone, a deity worthy of worship, let's just say. So given I give everything else to the character of God, I say everything else is true. I'm in this universe that I personally feel is fictional, but I'm gonna give it that.
Okay.
Is that God someone worthy of worshiping? Should
Suspended disbelief.
Yeah. Should I even want to kneel down and pray before that God? Because that God sounds like a Lovecraftian nightmare to me.
So okay, so let me just give a quick response to that, and then you can get into your questions. First of all, that was one of the things that drove me to be an atheist myself. Maybe the only thing. One, just the abuse I suffered as a kid. Two, when I did go to Bible college, a girl who I was in love with went on a missions trip to Indonesia and got bit by a snake and died. And like right in the middle of some kind of like missions trip in spring break or something. But so when we're talking about these issues, it's very important to understand that there's a philosophical side, but then there's also a human side, And the last guy we talked to, his name's Robert, and he had a son who died from, the son was only like 16 years old and he died. So there's, we got to be sensitive when we talk about this or any other issue. And so, but I do think there's very logical answers. I do think that there's, I don't see it as a problem. Honestly, I see it as a subject. So the subject of pain, I would call it, I remember very early on, it was definitely what caused me to be an atheist. But after being a Christian, reflecting on it and studying and experiencing a lot more pain, I've seen that it's made me stronger. But Marshall, you want to chime in?
Yeah, I sure do. I kind of think that's the wrong question. Just because if God exists, too bad. Sorry, you don't have a choice. The third commandment
Exactly.
in particular commands us to worship God. You know, so if God exists, it doesn't matter whether or not you like that God.
Hmm.
If the God demands worship, you are required to give that worship. So, to me, it's an interesting question, and as an atheist, it's one I certainly have pondered. But I think it's kind of trumped by the real question whether or not God exists. And if the answer is yes, then we owe that God some kind of allegiance, because the
Hmm.
consequences of failure are, of course, eternal damnation, assuming the Christian view of the God and so on. So.
Right, and that's why I think to even pose that question, Darrington, you have to commit a number of logical fallacies. But I'll let you tie your own knot.
Yeah, so
Good.
let's start with
Okay.
that. Like,
Okay.
my question really for you is, uh, what there's a lot of different ways of being Christian. So what do
Mhm.
you believe is literally true? Like, are we from the biblical stories?
There's a lot of imagery in the Bible, and if you look at the book of just take off the top of the hand the book of Isaiah, which I'm named after, and you read some of the descriptions in there, I mean, it's pretty amazing when you see the things that it talks about. For example, one of the things it talks about is in heaven. It says that the the wolf will like lay down with the lamb, and it says like the children will stick their hands into uh the snake holes and just like play with it, so it has some pretty amazing descriptions in there. That being said, there I may fall in a more liberal interpretation of some of the things, especially from the Old Testament, because I'm not a biblical scholar by any stretch of the imagination. So if you talk to biblical scholars, they will tell you that what they might say is that God interpreted the Bible perfectly, but what has happened is some people have, with translating it or whatever, you can trace the mistakes that they've made. And so you can go back and find that some stuff has been edited or so on. So that being said, I mean, I know you asked me what's literal. I know that Jesus, I'll take the story of Jesus as being literal. There's some stuff that, there's some large gaps in Jesus's life from the age of 12 to 30. And then at the very end, one of the last things that the gospel says is that he did a lot of other stuff that there's no room to write about. So there's a lot of missing gaps in there. And so there are some stuff that I think is very allegorical. And so, but I would say for the most part, I interpret it for the most part literally to be true. There definitely are some exceptions, but yeah, start there.
So God is there. He's all powerful. He's all knowing. He's good, and he makes a personal investment in your life, right? He cares about you and
Absolutely.
wants what's best for you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, nobody is created by accident, and again, I'm
Mhm.
speaking from a Christian perspective. Nobody is an accident. The parents might not intend the pregnancy, but God intends it, which is why abortion, of course, is such a grave moral evil. But nobody is born by accident. Everybody is deliberately created by God. So yes, I would agree with what you're saying from the Christian perspective, as I understand it, Darrington. God is all good, all powerful, and all knowing. And yes, he does create us with intention and loves all of us dearly and wants nothing more than for us to be united with him in eternal salvation.
And just one other quick thing before you ask your next question, Darrington, is that's not necessarily completely, I don't necessarily have to buy in that God is all knowing or is all powerful or is whatever else you want to call him, because I guess in the case of Jesus, he did limit himself in some regard. So he did enter into a 3D perspective came down into earth, but that doesn't mean that he, at the time being, maybe he didn't have all of his powers, but he could limit, for instance, if he wants to give us, and I don't know if we have free will or not, but if he does want to give us free will, he could choose to limit his knowledge, I guess you could say.
Hmm.
So it's not necessarily, but anyway, you got another question?
The first was, first question was set out to kind of define God in our
Sure,
conversation. And the second one is to define what good and evil really are. So, the question is the Bible lays out a set of rules, a lot of rules, actually, if you take the whole thing as one book. So how do we choose which of those rules to follow and which of those rules not to? I'm assuming that we wear polyester. Is there a moral framework in which you are defining the different laws in the Bible as good or bad?
Yes, because Jesus said that he came to fulfill and put away all of the stuff in the Old Testament. So I think this is polyester, by the way. I'm not sure if you just threw that out there, but I think so.
Sinner.
Well, yeah.
And I do love some clams. Actually, I got a funny story. Just sorry to sidetrack here, but when I live in South Korea. So when I first got here, I was served like an octopus in my soup, and I went like that, and I was like, I'm like, Joe, there's an octopus leg in my soup. And he had lived here before. And he's like, yeah, Isaiah, they eat it here. And I'm like, Joe, you didn't hear me. There is an octopus leg in my soup. Like, look. And he's like, yeah, Isaiah, eat it. And I'm like, I was so furious. I about wanted to go back to, if you would have offered me a ticket at that moment, I would have went back to America. But I ate it. And later on, I found myself eating live octopus in South Korea. So yeah, I wasn't a big seafood guy here, but I am in South Korea. So yeah, that's the easiest way to define that. In the New Testament, there's definitely a lot of rules, and they make a lot of sense. I've lived my life in 1 gazillion% contradiction to that, with prostitutes and drugs and alcohol and total hedonist in my life. So I know what my life was before that. I know what it led to, and I know what my life is submitted to the word in the New Testament, and it's changed my entire life. So I don't really think you could philosophically say, okay, well, where are you drawing this line? It seems like you're kind of picking and choosing, but I mean, in application, it's changed my life. So yeah, that's what I would have to say about that.
Basically, good and evil can be defined from a Christian perspective in obedience or disobedience to God's will. Anything that is consistent with God's will is good. Anything that is inconsistent with that, any kind of disobedience, is inherently evil. Sin is simply that which divides you from God. And so when we make our choices, we can choose good or bad because we do, in fact, have free will. And that's what makes sin possible. Sin isn't possible unless it's freely chosen. So go ahead.
No, is that your last point?
Yeah, that's fine. That'll do. I think the point is made.
Well, obviously there's some hard things to reconcile. I mean, you're an atheist and you're 40 and you have all of your hair, and I'm a Christian and I'm bolder than a blue jay. So you tell me, where's the justice in that one, buddy?
Right.
Well, here's my point is that I think a couple of these things are ill-defined. If you're going to define sin as being something against God, well, then we need to understand what God wants. And there's a lot of different ways to interpret that. I actually, Marshall, I'm gonna disagree with you entirely. I think that we have a duty almost to judge what God wants off of our own moral compass. Damn the consequences. So you could say, here is this law that God passes down, and it is good because it comes from God. But if I deem it to be immoral, I don't care if I'm going to go to hell, right? I'm not going to commit something that I personally believe is an immoral act just because an authority tells me to.
Fair enough, and I do want to add one thing though, Darrington, because I know you're going to raise if God's evil or not. But if you go by what the Bible says, if you take a look at the first book of the Bible, the first chapter of the Bible, it clearly shows that, first of all, nothing's supposed to die. Okay, it says that humans and animals are both supposed to eat plants. Okay, so there's that. So one, there was originally not supposed to be death, and then again, I've already told you at the end in Revelations, or yeah, what it talks about in heaven. It says like nothing's gonna die again. Like we're gonna be vegetarians again in heaven. Like nothing's gonna die again. So that's the beginning point and that's the end point. So I think if you're asking what God wants, I think God wants perfect peace, perfect justice, perfect righteousness. But along the way, some really messed up things have happened, and we can talk about that if you like.
Yeah. Well, because ultimately, this is what the argument devolves into, right? Is a sort of a list of gripes against God, and it comes off, I think, as the atheist sounding like we're just angry, you know. But we're not angry. What we're saying is, okay, well, religion comes to us with this promise of power, and then demonstrates none of it where it matters. So, you know, when you lose your car keys and you find your car keys, you thank God for it, but a hurricane sweeps into town, right? Kills babies. And suddenly, you know, well, it's just part of God's plan. And the question really comes down to is why would a good God allow unnecessary suffering to happen if he has the power to change it?
So let me answer this a couple different ways, but let's say, for example, you saw me push a kid right in front of a moving car. Okay, would you say that's a good act or that's an immoral act?
I would say that's an immoral act.
Okay, so what if you look to the immediate side and you saw that there's actually a diesel car getting ready to hit the kid, and by me pushing him into the moving car, it actually saved his life? Would you find that there's your assessment was wrong?
Sure. Right.
Okay. The reason why I'm saying that is because you may not find it, or you may not think that there's sufficient reason, or you say it's unnecessary. And I don't find that in the slightest sense of the word to be a contradiction, because maybe you don't know, maybe I don't know. I mean, if you ask me why all this stuff, part of the RHE is humility. Like, I don't know, maybe if I could plan things differently, maybe I would have done things differently. I could definitely say that. But if we're talking about logic, okay, because you want to get down to logic here. So I'll use a little bit of inductive reasoning for this, okay, because essentially it's an inductive reasoning that you're trying to formulate why God doesn't exist. Either it doesn't exist or it isn't good. Because even if your argument does succeed, the only thing that you'll prove is that maybe God is one, either he's evil, or maybe, which is maybe more plausible, is that, hey, maybe God has some evil intuitions that he's trying to keep in check, and he's a flawed person, and just like I'm flawed, and maybe that's the way I'm created after his image, you know, that maybe, because I mean, you do see, just so you know, because I know you're going to talk about some stuff from the Old Testament, you do see some stuff that he does something and he's like, oh God, you see him like having actual regret. So that's not really something you would expect to find someone who's already knows everything, or is never going to make a mistake, you know? So anyway, so let's see if we can find the fallacy in this reasoning. Okay, so all men are mortal. I'm mortal, therefore I'm a man. Is that right? Is that a correct line of reasoning?
No, that's category.
It's not. No. Okay, yeah, it's right. A logical fallacy, right? So, what about this one? Okay, if I ate Raisin Bran for breakfast this morning, then God exists, and I ate Raisin Bran for breakfast this morning, therefore God exists. Is that a correct line of reasoning?
No.
No, it actually is, because from the premises, it actually follows. You can say the premises are not true, because obviously that's a not true premise, but logically, that's a logically consistent syllogism. All right. So what you're trying to say is that if evil exists and I don't understand it, then somehow God either doesn't exist or isn't moral. So I don't see the logical connection that you're making between if I don't understand something, then it can't be true or doesn't exist, you know? I really don't.
That's not really what I'm saying.
Okay,
I think maybe I've done a poor job of communicating
that's fine.
what my issue with it is.
Making
and
up for last time, whenever you yeah, so validity and soundness are different,
Right.
Benjamin saying. Thank you. So what I'm saying is I don't find a logical connection between what you're saying. Maybe
Right.
if you phrase it a different way, I could
It goes back to the plot hole, right? So
okay.
the one piece of equipment that the skeptic has in this world
Mhm.
is when somebody comes to you with a premise, you say, well, is this consistent within its own context? Right?
Mhm.
Like, you know, the movies we were talking about earlier.
Mhm. Dumb and
And
Dumber.
so, right. So I don't even need to get to logic. I don't need to prove that, you know, real things that the Bible says existed. I don't need to talk about whether Jesus existed or not. The question really for me with the problem of evil is it consistent within its own story, right? So if the answer is yes, it is consistent, but within the framework of, you know, like what Marshall was saying, you know, good, we're going to define good as what God wants, and we're going to define God as what good is. And then then everything just kind of works out in a bootstrap kind of fashion.
Mhm.
I If that were the case, I would find myself in the exact same position of being anti-theist, because that doesn't sound like the type of God that I would want to worship. I don't think that's a type of God that you should worship. In fact, we should do everything that we can in that context to eliminate that God's effect on us as fast as possible, because that is, again, sort of a Lovecraftian nightmare.
Well, I'm not sure if Marshall as an atheist should speak for God or for the theist position, but yeah.
If good is something that we can define separately from God, and we can say whether or not God is worthy of our worship, then, you know, we can have that conversation. If the question is whether or not God is consistent among himself, like, yeah, he could be a flawed being, but then at that point, to what degree is he a God and not just a being of superior technology?
Okay,
and
I'm just going to answer the problem that you believe is out there. Okay,
Mhm.
So let's operate under a realm for a second under the Mormon presumptions about God and the universe and our souls. Okay, and we can at least figure this out philosophically. I'm not a Mormon. They believe some crazy stuff about space underwear and some turning into gods. I don't know. They have some whacked out views, especially the multiple wives. Marshall, we were talking about the multiple wives, right?
Yeah.
I don't see how that's a positive thing, because I have a hard enough time with one. So I don't see how someone's able to manage two or three. But
Well,
so
like
for the
Mormons,
record,
but all right.
that is no longer a thing. There's a lot of misconceptions about Mormons. They're basically spicy Protestants with a whole lot of Americana baked into their culture, right?
So,
Not a bad description.
So so Darrington, let's just assume that their theology is right for a second, okay?
Yeah.
Mhm.
So according to their theology, both you and I have already existed in heaven, okay? So the reason why we came to the earth was so that we can ascend to a God status, okay? So we would come down here to endure whatever hardships we face so that we could become our own gods and have our own planet. It's a pretty bad rabbit hole whenever you start to analyze it, but
Yeah.
let's just assume that that's true. Let's assume that you were an angel up in heaven and you got to see humans down there having free will, and you were like, man, I wish I could screw up and I wish I could experience God's grace, because the Bible actually says that the angels are jealous of human beings because they do not get to experience God's grace, because they don't have the same kind of free will that we have, you know? They're in God's presence. So for example, imagine if you're up in heaven And the
Yeah,
Bible actually, the
you
Bible
have to
actually,
enjoy yourself. The big guy says so. Right?
so okay, so the Bible in Revelation says that God's just like a light. It says that you don't even need a sun in heaven because God's light is just everywhere. So you think under that circumstance you could go and steal anything, you know? You think as soon as you go to do something wrong, you're just going to get caught before you do it. So let's say you wanted to find that path to God yourself, you know? I mean, did you ever see the movie? Did you ever see the movie? What's that movie called? What Dreams May Come?
Yeah.
Okay, so you know the ending when they want to go back and live their lives again because they want to find each other, right?
Right.
And so, what if you're up there and you're like, man, God, I want to go out and I want to experience some other false gods so that I can find my way back to you, you know? So,
Yeah.
I'm not saying that I believe that, but that's one of a lot of different ways that I could solve the problem of evil or pain or whatever. I mean, I can tell you from my own personal life, my life has been made better by suffering, by pain. It's grown my character, you know. So on a personal level, I don't see even a slightest bit of a contradiction there. So I can
Well,
understand, I can appreciate why you would, and I do know what it's like to be an atheist. But as a Christian, I take a look and I said, hey, this is actually a gift to experience this time that we have here, where we are fallible, where our teeth rot, where we're subject to addictions or whatever. You know, before you follow that up, I just want to say that if you hit the gym and you grow some muscles, I could totally see you on a beach in like one of those romance novels, Darrington. You got it, man.
yeah.
You got. Actually, if you ever want to do like the 12-inch, like what's it called, the hair thing, man, I'll be your first patient, bro. You could. I just need like 3 or 4 inches. I'll be happy.
It's going to donation. You know, a 40-year-old man with ponytail is something else. So I think very soon it will be going to Locks for Love.
Lux for love. Okay, there you go.
All right.
All right. So yeah. So go ahead.
Okay, so the real question is the hypothetical, right? Because we can always imagine something different. The question is in those worlds, like let's say, you know, we're in heaven and we're everything's perfect except for we don't have free will. Which I don't even know what that looks like. Like that to me sounds like a robot.
Exactly.
If
Exactly.
you don't, everything's perfect, but you
Exactly.
don't have free will. You're very
Exactly.
happy being the
Computer
coffee maker,
program.
right? And then you come down here to experience free will, and the very first thing that you want to do is give your free will back to God while you're here in the experiment in which you were supposed to experience free will. So like I can imagine a world where, like in What Dreams May Come, there's a simulated world. We're out there, right? And we're playing this world as if it was a video game.
Okay.
So we're like, oh, I wonder what it would like to play real world the game. And we're like jacked in like in the Matrix or whatever. And then we experience this whole life. And then when our life ends, it's game over. We put in another quarter and decide to go again. And that to me sounds like a perfectly self-consistent universe. But that is one in which there is not sort of, for lack of better words, a sky wizard, right? There's no one personal force that loves us like a heavenly father type character, right? It's just sort of like a bunch of nerds in a higher level of reality playing a game. And in What Dreams May Come, that's almost exactly the situation, right? There is no single character when they reach the afterlife. In fact, heaven and hell are just constructs of our own personalities. And that's self-consistent. What's not self-consistent is any of that you can determine out of reading the Bible. And that's kind of why I came back to this, like what comes out of the imaginations of our ancestors. I personally feel like the stories that come out of these old books are just inferior to the types of stories that we could come up with now. So why not, figure out a better framework, right?
I want to tackle the problem of evil from a Christian perspective. And I just want to kind of say, here's kind of the solution as I understand it from that perspective. Basically, God is all knowing, all loving, all powerful, creates out of a spirit of love, creates Eden, which is this paradise into which he places the first man and woman. But because he loves them so much, he recognizes that they cannot love him back unless he grants them free will. Because, like you said, Darrington, otherwise they'd just be robots. That wouldn't be love. But with free will comes what's called the radical possibility of evil. In other words, think of it like giving a teenager a car, right? You give your son or daughter a new car. It's this wonderful gift. And the gift has a purpose, which is to go to school, go to work, run errands, right? So it's a beautiful gift with a purpose. However, they can also choose to abuse this gift. So they can take the car out on the weekends and go drag racing, okay, which is an abuse of the gift. Well, freedom is likewise. Freedom is this gift. And we can choose to either use it for its intended purpose, which is to follow God's plan for our lives, or we can use it to pursue whatever else we want, whatever selfish interest we have or whatever, to not follow God's plan. But we can choose. Adam and Eve, of course, choose evil. They're tempted, whatever, deceived. They choose evil. And that creates a situation now where there is a rift between humans and God. And so they cannot live with God because they no longer have the grace that's required to do so. So they are basically banished to this now corrupted world where everything is kind of messed up and upside down and topsy-turvy, and it's a mess. And God promises, hey, I'm going to send a savior. We're going to bail you out. But the fact of the matter is, while we're here in this mortal world, we suffer death because of the fact that we now have original sin. In other words, like we had this gift, which is grace. We lost that gift. Now we can't pass that gift on to our children. It would be like if I had property and I lose that property gambling, let's say, I no longer have this to pass on to my children as an inheritance. So what ends up happening is we suffer from a condition called concupiscence, which is a proclivity to sin. We prefer to sin. We choose sin. We are inclined to sin. And that is why all of this badness, all of this evil happens. Now, why doesn't God do something about this? Because it would short circuit our free will, and then we would go right back to being robots. We would not be, there would be no love unless God allows the evil to exist. So God is entirely self-consistent. God is logical. But the issue is people say, well, can God create a rock that he cannot lift? Why can't God do this or that? And the answer is actually no. God cannot create a rock he cannot lift. He cannot do evil. He cannot lie. There are things that God cannot do because God is logically consistent. That doesn't mean he's not all powerful. That means that there are reasonable, logical limitations upon God. And we might not fully understand it, like the Trinity or the incarnation or other things. These are mysteries of the faith. There are things that we certainly don't understand, but that's because God is this infinite being and our minds are very finite. But that's kind of the answer to the problem of evil. We're responsible for it because the world is corrupted, but God doesn't want to interfere with our capacity to love.
So, and Darrington, I will say this, I'll grant you the premise that I do think that too much freedom, or actually maybe any freedom, probably is actually a bad thing. I mean, if I could choose to live in a universe, I would be glad to live in a universe where you didn't have that kind of choice. I can tell you, I live in South Korea and Asia, and I can go out in the street right now. It's 2:00 in the morning and walk around for the next hour and not have to worry about anything bad happening to me. People don't have guns. They're very, 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 very strict as far as drugs. So I'm from California, man. You cannot do that in California. So we've given up certain kind of freedoms to enjoy more safety here. So, if I could choose it, if I could choose the reality, it probably wouldn't be that people have that kind of free will. But I understand. I get where you're coming from, and that's what I said. There's just a reality. You've suffered. I've suffered. People die. People.
I'm not saying we shouldn't have free will. I'm saying we should have free will. I think we do have free will. I think we can argue over what that means.
Okay.
But like the free will problem is a band-aid that's been put over this, what I consider a plot hole, which, you know, you say, well, we were created, we were given free will in paradise, and then the fall happens, right? And we lost our grace. Well, what is the losing your grace? Why did that happen? Did that happen because the all-powerful, all-knowing God knew it was going to happen and that was part of the plan?
Yeah,
Right?
actually it was.
Because then
Yeah,
that's
it
not
was.
free will, right? If everything goes according to his plan, we're still the program operating according to his plan. And that's what I mean is non-self consistent. So like, to me, this is very analogous to the Citizen Kane problem, where like, if you haven't established why at the very beginning, you can kind of pass over it and you can make apologetics for it later. But if you don't establish why, like sin, we know what we call it, but we don't really understand what it is unless you go back to the biblical story, which I don't think anybody thinks is literally true. You know, like there wasn't like literally a snake and literally a tree of knowledge, right? Those are allegories.
Walked upright.
Right. Those are allegories for something, for the, you know, reality of what growing up in this world is. So I guess to me, it feels like we're patching over the plot holes with these concepts that are complex, and they're just complex enough for us to go, okay, that makes sense, but it doesn't really make sense when you look into it.
It makes sense to me. It makes sense to me. And as I said, I know what it's like to live a life under sin, to where I didn't care what I did one way or the other. And I definitely know what it's like to live a life submitted to the word. And I can just tell you from practical experience, you know, if you want to tell me, should we base a society, your rules, your laws on following some concepts that you should love the people the same way that you love yourself. That's the basis of empathy, Darrington. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's one of the big parts why we have the E in our thing.
Yeah.
And I think Dale Carnegie said I think he was quoting someone else, but he says that all the problems that man suffers stems from that one problem, is that you're not seeing the other person as an equal. You're devaluing them, you're debasing them, you're dehumanizing them in some sense of the word. So, I mean, if you can tell me a better system where, hey, everyone just go out, have sex with everybody, just cheat on your spouse, just get abortions whenever you want. Like,
I'm saying you don't need God to have that moral framework, right? It doesn't need to be the word. I love my neighbor just as much as myself. I don't need God for that. And that may sound offensive to you, but it's offensive to me when you insist that I need the word in order to have those feelings, right? When you say that being an atheist means I'm going to end up like North Korea, or I'm going to be having abortions every day, right? So like, part of that empathy is understanding that where it comes from may not necessarily be the word. It may be something that's even more primitive and more foundational to us.
Yeah. So Darrington, let me ask you this: Do you believe in aliens?
Sure.
Okay. So you believe in like flying saucers who abduct people from
no.
who visited there? Okay. So let's just say tomorrow you go out and you get abducted, and they start probing you in all the wrong places. And
why isn't Darrington coming back? I'm joking.
So let's say you get probed, and you're quite sore afterwards. Okay, and you come back and you're limping around. God, this went kind of in an odd direction, but let's just say that happened, and someone says, "Well, what happened?" And you're like, "Well, I got abducted by an alien," and then someone says, well, that doesn't make any logical sense. You realize that aliens don't exist. You realize, and they start getting into the science and the logic behind how impossible it would be for a being to cross, you know, and they get into all these arguments. Do you think that's going to make one, and you have no proof you have no physical proof do you think that's going to influence you one way or the other? What the other person says is logical or illogical?
No,
No,
I
no,
think
no, no,
it's,
no, no, just hold on. No, okay. So if you say, well, no, you said in the last podcast that it just, if you believe in God, then you're just an illogical person. You didn't say it directly, but you said it in a roundabout way. You said, we're just going to get past it. I mean, I thought it was funny the way that you said it. I will grant it that.
Yeah.
You did say it in a very creative way. But
that was my way of being very politely
but
saying
you were more
that
than
God is basically Santa Claus, right? And at some point in your life, you look back at your belief in Santa Claus and you go, maybe that was a little silly.
Okay, so again,
I was trying to be polite and respectful.
Okay, but if I've experienced God, it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. It makes no logic if you're going to sit there and try to reason away my experiences with God. I've had an experience with Jesus Christ. It's changed my life. I don't care if you find it logical or illogical.
I'm not rationalizing it away. I'm not rationalizing it away.
Well,
this is not a logic argument.
Here's what you said. You said it's going to be kind of silly to have a belief in God. Right. So I'm telling you, my belief in God is not silly in the slightest sense of the word.
And I believe you. I believe that you believe that it's not silly, and I respect that. I totally respect your personal perspective.
It was life-changing experiences. So if you're going to say that I'm condescending to you, well, you spoke in a very condescending way. I mean, I got thick skin, and I want to show people that, hey, you can get insulted and still respond respectfully, gracefully. But this makes sense to me. Maybe it doesn't make sense to you, but you're not the only person capable, or atheists are not the only person capable of inductive reasoning or using logic and science and trying to understand these things. Do you have every answer? Absolutely not. That's where the humility is going to come in that says, hey, there's a lot of things I still don't know about this. You want to get into physics and talk about all of the problems that physicists haven't solved in the universe that they're stumped by. Maybe another theologian can answer some of these questions. I don't know. I don't have all the answers. I kind of throw some stuff out there. Maybe it is this way. Maybe, I don't know. At the end of the day, it's like, it's me trying to figure out what's on the, a billion light years away on the other side of the universe. I have no idea. I really don't have any idea. So, I'll be the first to say I don't have all the answers. Let's say that.
Well, here's my bottom line, Isaiah, is that like, I can respect your perspective and believe in it, believe that you believe in it. But I have a perspective of what I believe in too. And so when I say things based off of my perspective, you should not probably take that as offensive, because I'm not making a judgment on your beliefs. I'm making a judgment on the world that I see. And those are two very different things. Like I respect the hell out of your beliefs. But as a belief system of a person that I respect, not as a perspective that I have.
But in the future, then don't refer to it as being silly or think that you're going to outgrow it. It's basically because you just compared God to Santa Claus, and that's a completely ridiculous comparison.
That's my personal beliefs, right? I personally believe that the concept of God is the same thing as the concept of Santa Claus. So that's just my personal beliefs. And I should be able to state my personal beliefs without somebody else getting offended.
It's an argument. It's an argument.
No, if you think I'm silly, that's fine. I mean, I'm not going to say you're silly. I mean, I
don't think you're silly. I think God is silly. Those two different things.
Okay, so
we have to separate the argument against an idea from our personal self. When we clash ideas, we have to put the ideas into the arena and let the ideas clash. But when the ideas clash, that doesn't mean that we're the ones getting beat up. It's the ideas that are being tested and evaluated, getting dinged and dented and so on. But it isn't you or I. And at the end of the boxing match, or I should say, it's more like when they make the robots fight each other. At the end of the robots fighting each other, the ideas fight each other. Both sides come together and we shake hands.
Absolutely.
Because hey, at the end of the day, there you go. We are all engineers.
That was a triple. Boom.
Working on it.
We got four actually.
So
absolutely.
So that's important to keep that perspective, especially when we do topics like this, because these topics can get pretty intense, as I well know.
Absolutely.
So
I would love to continue having conversations. I do think that you know, we can criticize ideas without criticizing each other. And
Yeah.
please don't take anything that I say as an attack against you. But I have to be able to say the things that I believe with confidence in the aspect that I believe them. Just like you should be able to pronounce that you believe in Jesus, I should be able to openly pronounce that I don't believe in Jesus and not have other people be offended by that.
So let me just ask you in a frank way, because I think this is really good. This is really good for people to hear. Do you not think, in any sense of the word, you were being condescending to me in what you said, or insulting that I would have a belief in God by saying that I'm just going to outgrow it? Because that's essentially what you're saying, is that I'm just going to outgrow it in the same way I would outgrow Santa Claus, you know?
Right. That's not my intention. Okay,
that's fine. Fair enough. And even if it was, I'm unfortunately, as a Christian, required to forgive you. So I'm kind of like out of luck here. So,
all right.
But you know, that being said, actually, you know what? We want to end off on a positive note here, as if that wasn't positive enough. But we are going to end up here with a little friendly fire. We're going to call this friendly fire. So our last guest couldn't answer this question. So let's see if you can answer it, okay? Because we're talking about, well, we didn't really talk about the devil. He came up a little bit, but if the devil had a favorite band, who would it be?
Tenacious D. Jack Black. Yeah.
Marshall tends to think Backstreet Boys.
Yeah, Backstreet Boys for sure. Yeah.
I said BTS. Okay, it's really popular Korean band, if you can call them a band. They're the Korean version of the Backstreet Boys. But okay, here we go. I got another one. So if you got stuck on an island with any action star, and you had to rely on this person to get you off of the island only by their real life, not by their movie stuff, like, who would it be?
I don't know them well enough.
I'm about to go with Vin Diesel, obviously, because
I don't know the actors personally, so like I know their characters they play, but I
okay,
don't know
pick a character. I'd go with Vin Diesel, but
yeah, I'm gonna take Tom Hanks from Castaway, right?
That is a good answer. That is a good answer.
Hey, interesting enough, Darrington, on that movie, when he gets stuck on the island, something washes up aboard, and he goes, Bakersfield, California. And Marshall and I are from Bakersfield. And when that happened, the crowd went crazy, man. Did you see that in the theater,
yeah,
Marshall?
Yeah, same exact thing. Everybody just laughed and clapped.
All right, Marshall, you got another friendly fire for him?
Yeah, man. If you were to start a conspiracy theory, what would you start, man? What's your favorite? What would you start for a conspiracy theory? That's a huge one. But you can't tell me that as an evil atheist, you haven't thought about this.
Oh yeah. Well, my conspiracy theory is that we actually landed on the moon. Back, like Neil Armstrong actually landed on the moon.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking about that. That is a firm, faithful belief that I have, that we did actually land on the moon back in the 70s. And I take that entirely on faith, right? And by authority. Like, I don't know at all, but you could never convince me that we did not land on the moon.
That thing is so fake, man.
Well, I actually know the thing behind it is the moon landing was actually filmed by Stanley Kubrick, but because he's such a perfectionist, he insisted on filming it on location.
Right. That makes total sense.
Total fake, just on location.
Just
all right. Location. By the way, Mark, Darren, are you a father?
I'm not.
Oh, okay.
Right.
My daughter just turned 3, so.
Well, congratulations. That's awesome.
Thank you.
I'm super jealous.
Level 3.
I'll trade you for your hair any day. I can make another baby.
That's why I have hair.
Yeah, I cannot go back hair. So we met in an religious atheist group. So I was wondering if you could I thought this was fascinating. Absolutely. Like, I thought I had a good idea of the problem of evil until I heard this amazing, crazy argument. So could you just throw it out there and just put it in the zeitgeist, and we'll talk about it for a minute?
Yeah. So what's interesting is, well, I just want to step back real quick and just talk about like what apologetics tries to do. So apologetics tries to give good reasons for believing, typically in the Christian God, but not necessarily, right? There's like Muslim apologetics as well. And the interesting thing when it comes to the problem of evil is that a lot of the reasons that typically theists will come up with in order to ameliorate and solve the problem of evil can actually be inverted and directed towards an evil God, right? So it's called the evil God hypothesis. And the interesting thing about the argument is that it's not an argument to say that God is necessarily evil. The interesting thing is that it's designed basically to argue to a tie, to say that there's as good a reason based on the arguments that theists provide to believe that God is themselves evil as good. And so the way that they go about doing this is they take a look at different theories of what is good. So one of the theories of good and evil, one of them is the theory of privation. And that basically is like suffering is good, suffering is bad, pleasure is good, thriving and flourishing, all of these things that we consider human experiences, that's what makes up good. And the inverse of that is what makes up bad. Another theory is divine command theory, which I believe Marshall did a pretty good job of defending. But note that all of these theories of evil and good are actually compatible with the religion of Christianity. And so there's Augustinian, there's Aquinian theories of evil. And if the atheist, or if the, I'd say, evil God defender can say that it's at least as plausible that evil God is behind the workings of the universe for each of these, then the theist is in a really tough position where they have to say, sure, I have Kalam cosmological arguments for believing that God exists in the first place, but is God the kind of being that we should want to worship, right? And so let's take a look at the free will example, right? I want to say, well, listen, free will is the thing that if God wants to make the most good, he has to grant humans the capacity to do evil. But you can flip the same idea around and say, well, if God were actually a maximally evil being, then what might be the case is that God simply allows the good that we do in our free actions to create the maximum amount of evil, the maximum amount of, let's say, suffering under the privation theory of good and evil. Or I like the divine command theory of good and evil, where God, good is what whatever God commands and is consistent with God's internal compass or God's nature, right? It's God's nature. That is that which is consistent with what God's nature is good. Well, there's nothing to stop the evil God believer from turning around and saying, well, actually, it turns out that what is evil is that which is consistent with what evil God's will or evil God's nature is. And so if we can flip all of the things that theists say and equally defend the evil God, the theist is in a really tough position because when it comes to metaphysical claims, they're all unfalsifiable, right? And so what you have to do is carve out what they call a piece of the probability space. All that means is you have to come up with as many plausible models as possible for one side or the other. And the one with more plausible models, just probabilistically speaking, is or if they're tied, they're at the same level. Yeah. What's up?
So Benjamin, we're definitely gonna have you on for a second to come on and talk about that issue alone. I think it's a fascinating topic if you're following the logic behind it, because as a Christian, we always say that the suffering actually is necessary, right? Because we believe in this ultimate good that's trying to be accomplished. But if you were to flip it, as you said, flip the script, well, what if the being was ultimately evil? And so what good would it be for us to experience kittens or butterflies or ice cream? Or so if you say, well, what's the purpose of us experiencing all that? Well, think about it. Think about if the deity, he wants to cause the most amount of suffering. So wouldn't it make sense he just sends everyone to hell? But no, that actually wouldn't make sense, because we'd have to experience our life first. We'd have to know what we're missing out on for the rest of eternity. So that is, I mean, when you start to examine all of that, I don't know, it just flips the script on everything. It's like, what if you challenge your very nature of reality of everything? Where do you go from there? So we'll have to discuss that in depth next time. But you know what? We're out of time now. I thank you for explaining that. Darrington, I thought about this, having a recurring session, a monthly session at Darrington called Darrington's Alley, where you you said, yeah, Darrington said, initial little inside joke, he said that when he saw me posting online, he said that I walked down the wrong alley, because it was amongst a bunch of atheists, so anti-theists. So
it was a place where we go to kind of post a lot of crap. So
I thought it was hilarious.
We get a lot of street fighters, like Christian apologetic street fighters in there that just want to attack. And anyway, I
think you're brilliant. I think you're absolutely brilliant. I really enjoyed talking to you, Darrington, and we would love to see you back on a monthly basis, bro.
I'd love to be here as long as you'll have me and I have the time. So, I'm definitely enjoying the conversations.
All right, I love
you guys are awesome.
We like, you need if you want to sharpen your knife, you need some more steel. You know, you can't use butter.
I don't want. So the fight is about subtlety. It's a soft martial art, right? It's about moving chi and not, throwing really hard punches. So let's keep it soft.
But no, this is a great show, and it was great to kind of cover the problem of evil. And Darrington, I'd like to have you back. So hey, we'll see you next time.
Course adjourned. Thanks for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you back on the next episode of RHE Podcast. Goodbye.
All right, bye-bye.